So in this video, we want to talk about what our experience has been so far raising goats for the first time, and to share some of our thoughts about animal husbandry in terms of goats and other ruminant livestock, and just livestock in general. We'll just start by telling the story of how we got our goats.
So we've got all this land to clear, brush and fence lines, and we've got multiflora rows really bad, which is super hard to eradicate. It spreads really well. Goats are very well known for being great grazers on like just the roughest, thorniest, most horrible, overgrown brushy stuff. I wanted to give them a try. Our neighbors had a bunch of baby goats drop in January, and I didn't want to get too committed. I'm not trying to like have a whole herd all at once. So we bought the two baby brothers, Billy and Rufus, and the netting, and just enough to sort of dip our toes in the water and see what it's like, see if we like having goats, and see if they can make a difference, when we're out here trying to clear stuff.
Yesterday, one of the brothers, Billy, died. He had been sick for a long time, and so part of this video is wanting to talk about the experience of dealing with a sick baby goat and everything that we did for him and everything that we would do differently in the future.
Pretty much, not day one, but pretty much immediately when he got here, he was having trouble.
So they came to our farm on February 20th.
This Tuesday would be 3 weeks.
So, and what's today?
Today's
today? Sunday.
Today's the 10th.
So 2 days from now will be
Tuesday. It will be the 12th.
3 weeks. So we didn't even have him for 3 weeks.
No.
When we got them almost 3 weeks ago, they were 8 weeks old, which is right around the time that they're normally sent to a new farm, if that's where they're going.
If they're boys.
If they're boys. They seemed fine when we got them. Both of them did. Billy was a little bit smaller than Rufus, and we didn't have any reason to believe that there was any strange reason for that.
Right. Just a smaller.
Yeah, we just thought he was the smaller of the two. And they both had kind of the sniffles, and
Billy had a pretty crusty nose.
They both had runny crusty noses. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, Billy's breathing did already sound labored at that point too, and I have video of him up close that day too. So from the get-go, they both had runny noses, and we figured, they just had like a cold, the stress of the transition. They had been enclosed indoors, so there was a lot of contributing factors that would explain having like some mild stuff coming up for them.
Yeah.
And Rufus did recover just fine.
Yep.
But
pretty much immediately, Billy came down with the staph infection.
Yeah.
On his butt.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember how everything went down.
So maybe 3 days later.
The first thing that we noticed go wrong with Billy was within a few days, I noticed that under his tail, he had some white bumps. And he was also already kind of having bumps on his neck that we noticed.
They were just starting.
Yeah, he was just starting to get bumps, scaly bumps on his neck. And I posted about it in a goat forum I'm on Facebook, and they said it looked like staph infection. So at this point, we were still maintaining our philosophy of like non-intervention with him, and so the most that we did was just apply apple cider vinegar to address the infection under his tail, and it did seem to be working. I also applied it to the areas where he was getting the scaly bumps.
I wish that we had dusted him with DE at that point too.
Yeah, so dusting with diatomaceous earth would have been a course of action for suspected external parasites like lice and mites.
Lice and mites. I wish we had done that.
I still don't think that would have made a difference.
I know, but whatever. We had it.
Yeah, so we didn't do anything to treat for
the mites.
Well, we didn't even think it was mites.
No, we weren't sure what it was.
Yeah, we weren't sure what was going on because the nature of the of his skin condition didn't quite coincide with what I had read about mites.
Right.
So we thought that the whole thing was like some kind of viral situation and that it was related to what was going on under his tail.
Yeah.
So we didn't treat for parasites. We just did the apple cider vinegar because we thought it was basically a fungal infection, not even viral, or like a fungal infection that was a symptom of like a systemic viral issue. And his skin was clearing up and the staph, like the white bumps went away and his skin was peeling and healthy skin was being revealed. So we thought we were on track. And then
it got cold.
It got really cold. The temperature dropped really suddenly from being in like the 50s to, I think the low that night was 15 degrees.
Like the day before we had them out here.
Yeah, it was like hot.
And Rufus was panting. It was so hot.
Yeah, so it was a really big shock. And the next morning I heard Billy screaming, and he was screaming as he was trying to defecate, and then his poop came out like completely wrong. And that's pretty much a really bad sign with goats. Like even when they are ill, like front of the course illnesses that goats have, like their poop doesn't, it's just a really bad sign if their poop isn't coming out the way it's supposed to be.
It was a dog poop.
Yeah, it came out like a dog poop, like there.
One tube.
Yeah, like just a tube of poop, and normally it's like
pellets.
Little pellets.
Yep.
And he was shivering, like
cold.
He was definitely cold, and his respiratory situation was apparent.
Very bad. Yeah.
He was wheezing.
So we took him to the vet.
Yeah, I was freaking out. So we decided to take him to the vet. And this kind of goes into what I wanted to talk about in terms of like our animal husbandry philosophy. Like it was a real battle for us to make the decision to take him to the vet, because having an animal on the farm that is so high maintenance that you have to drive it to the vet is not ideal.
Right.
And not the kind of decision that we want to have to make.
The more animals that we get, the less and less feasible that becomes.
Yeah.
You know, and just from like the pure economics of it, like we bought him for meat.
Mm-hmm.
And so $100 to buy him, and then another $150 just to go to the vet. Like you're already talking about a goat for $250. Like you could probably buy a full-grown goat that's ready to be harvested for less than that. It just stops making sense really fast when you're taking animals to the vet like that.
Yeah. And obviously I know that people who keep goats as pets, like they're going to do stuff like that. They're going to go to the vet. They're going to pay for all the medication, all the treatments, and baby them constantly. But that's just not logistically reasonable for homestead purposes.
Right, but we're not doing that. Like they're not our pets.
Yeah.
They're not show goats. This isn't a 4-H project.
And we had already talked about what our philosophy around raising animal herds was before we even purchased these goats, which is that if they have any sort of weak disposition, that they are not to be in our genetics, and we're not to fuss over them and have to intervene, and that they are to either be culled or sold.
Well, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves now. Let's finish the Billy story, then we'll talk about philosophy.
Okay, but we did take him to the vet because he's our first goat, and we loved him so much,
and we didn't want him to die,
and we felt bad. So we took him to the vet, and the vet did a pretty cursory examination.
She thought he was fine.
She thought he was fine. I thought we were taking him to the vet and he was going to have to be put down. He was doing so bad. But she just said it sounded like he had pneumonia and that his skin was probably mites. And what I don't like is that she didn't actually test and officially diagnose him with mites, because normally that is kind of standard care, is to take a scraping of their skin and actually look at it under a microscope.
When we took Douglas in, that's what she did.
Yeah, but she just gave him a once over and said, probably mites, probably pneumonia. Here's some antibiotics, and here's a topical.
Is that a tick?
No.
That's not a tick?
No, it's not a tick.
Okay. I mean, tick season's coming, man.
Here's antibiotics, and here's a topical external parasite
for
treatment.
both of them.
For both of them.
Yep.
Like what you give to a dog or cat, like just on the back of the neck. And she said, this will wipe them out completely. You don't have to do anything else. and he's going to be fine.
And he was doing better.
He was doing relatively better compared to that morning when he was screaming and shivering. So the improvement we saw was just the fact that he wasn't shivering anymore and he started pooping normally again.
Yep.
The entire time, also, he never lost his appetite. He kept eating.
Eating.
He was eating and eating and eating, and we thought that was a good sign, right? Because everyone knows, like, if an animal stops eating, that's when you know, like, shit's going down.
Right. His FAMACHA was good.
His FAMACHA was good, which is just a score of the intensity of the darkness of the skin in your eyelid or your gums. And
it's an indicator of, like, anemia, parasites, just the health of your blood.
So she also, at the vet, she also looked at his eyelid and
Looked
said
good.
that it looked good. But again, she wasn't very technical with her
She didn't compare
test.
She didn't compare it to the card.
Yeah, she didn't hold up the actual color indicator that you're supposed to do when you're trying to.
I thought it didn't look bad, but it was probably like mid-range.
Exactly. And it's supposed to be
bright red.
Perfect.
Pink.
And anything less than that is an indication that anemia is setting in.
Right.
Of course, I only learned all of this like after the fact.
Yeah, we're learning as we go.
That was the extent of his improvement from the vet. He was eating and eating.
Yep.
But days were going by. His skin was not getting better. In fact, it was getting worse. We were noticing the scaliness was just like spreading.
Yep.
Like his entire face was rough. Just everywhere. His whole body.
And it was like, when it was peeling off, it was taking his fur with it.
Yes, he was losing fur, which
is also not good when it gets cold. Like,
no, yeah. Man. So again, would be normal indications of a mite infestation, but he was treated for mites.
Yep.
And we dusted him with diatomaceous earth.
After that, we did dust him.
After that, when it
and his bedding, I did that a few times.
Yeah. So it didn't make sense that his skin wasn't improving. And
also all the while, his brother Rufus, growing, happy, no mites, nothing, perfect. He's a perfect goat. I mean, I hope I'm not jinxing anything.
Yeah, don't say that.
But like, you think of a goat in your brain, and you're like, it's a Rufus, you know. And it's like, how can these two twins be this way?
Yeah. So as Rufus was getting bigger,
like huge,
it became very noticeable that Billy wasn't growing, and in fact,
he was even losing
weight, and he was already small for his age.
Yep.
So this was basically what was going on for a week after we took him to the vet.
Skipping ahead, you started giving him tincture.
In the days following the vet and the treatments and him not improving and his respiration still being questionable, I started resorting to my herbal remedies, which is what I should have just done from the get-go because the vet didn't end up making a difference.
Yeah.
But I already have my herbal remedies on hand, so it doesn't hurt to use them.
Right.
So I was dosing him with mullein tincture and nettle tincture.
Yep. You gave him, we put kefir out.
Yeah,
he probably didn't drink.
Yeah, that was the other thing. So even though he was eating so voraciously, he wasn't good about drinking water, and he wasn't good about taking advantage of the free choice minerals and supplements that we put out for them.
The baking soda that they're supposed to like.
And Rufus was good about it. So Rufus was eating the baking soda, which helps balance their rumen. It's just too acidic. It just helps them with their digestion.
Yeah.
And we put out kefir, which is probiotic. We put out kelp, which is just an all-around nutritional support for them.
Yep.
And salt, really high-quality salt for the electrolytes. And Rufus was pretty gung-ho on the baking soda and the salt, and good about drinking water. Like, I was making special water as well that had vitamin B complex and apple cider vinegar in it. And Rufus drank all of it.
He would slam it. He loved it.
And Billy didn't, even though it was for Billy.
Probably make him some more.
Yeah.
So we were giving him tincture 2 or 3 times a day. And then finally, this was 3 days ago, we decided to worm him again.
Yeah, because I had just been reading about his symptoms and parasitism, and it just became apparent to me that it didn't make any sense for him to be losing weight and having the symptoms that he was having, despite having been treated, if he wasn't wormy.
Because he had the antibiotic.
He'd been given antibiotics. He'd been treated for mites. The only explanation for the fact that the life was draining from him was the fact that there were probably parasites inside of him doing that, which we had ruled out because he was wormed right before we got him. But the fact of the matter is that
sometimes you miss. Sometimes there's too much.
Sometimes there's too many worms, and one go with a mild dewormer doesn't do it.
Right.
And if you are a goat with a weak disposition and you go through stress and you transition to a new farm,
a lot can go wrong.
It just makes them susceptible to parasites.
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, I think he was dying of the worms, and we did use chemical dewormer, which we probably wouldn't do again in the future, but again, we were desperate. And he died 2 or 3 days after I gave him the chemical dewormer.
2 days.
2 days after I gave him the chemical dewormer.
And one of our theories is that he went into worm shock.
Yeah, so...
Hey!
So something that can happen when you deworm a very high-load parasitic goat is they can go into worm shock. Where
any animal.
Any animal.
Yeah.
Where when all of the worms start dying off, it overloads their systems with toxins, and it can also cause internal bleeding from the worms like leaving where they probably left holes.
Yeah. It seemed like not a coincidence. Well, and the other thing was the day before he died, it was also really rainy, cold and rainy, and he was being really bad about staying dry.
We couldn't catch a break with the weather.
Yeah. And so it was that night after a full day of it being cold and rainy when we went out to check on them before, putting them to bed, that he was in there, but he was laying like on his side, which for a goat is not a good sign. Like
big red flag.
Yeah, they're supposed to basically always be on their bellies or always standing. So he was on his side and he was shouting, and that's when we went into full 911 mode. I was holding him for hours to try and warm him up. Eventually, we moved him into the basement, and that's where he stayed with the heat lamp to just try and get him warm, keep him warm. He made it through the night like that in his little crate, but then the morning after, pretty mid-morning, and we don't need to get into the details of his death, but he passed away. We were both there. It was horrible. One of the worst things I've ever seen, objectively. So R.I.P. Billy. He's buried right over there under an apple tree. So he'll fertilize that apple tree.
Mm-hmm. And he's in the crowd where he wanted to be all the time.
You're gonna make me cry, dude.
Sorry.
His last day alive, it was raining, and we wanted to keep him dry, but he was just begging to be let out and to be brought down here to graze. He just wanted out so bad, and
we couldn't let him.
Couldn't let him because we're trying to keep him dry, and so R.I.P.
So that all happened, which brings us to
the future
of our goat herd, which as of now stands at one goat.
We're going to get another one. Well, we're not getting one. So our neighbor is buying a buckling for his herd. He's going to use that buckling. They raise fainting goats. So he's going to come out here and be Rufus's companion for a while. We'll see, what happens with all that. But that'll be really good because it's just not okay. It's not acceptable to have a goat live alone. They're herd animals, so they need to, be with their own kind. But in terms of the future of goats specifically at this farm, there's still some question about what we want to do this year.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that I really like most right now is to buy either a bred doe or a doe with kids that are ready to be moved, so that we can start having our own milk production. I don't know exactly where you're at right now.
I want to do milk production too. I just told you I'm not sure I'm imminently ready to take that on.
Right. So we're thinking about it, and there isn't a doe that's waiting for us right now anyway. So, you know.
But the other main thing about our search for our new additions is that we're not just going to impulsively purchase neighbor's goats.
He's eating your microphone.
Well, if you couldn't hear any of that.
Yeah, we're looking for, we're gonna, you know, and I knew that going into it. Is like, you want to buy animals from farms that look like what you want your farm to look like. So these boys were born in a barn and they were raised for their first 2 months of life in a barn.
Right.
Which is not what we are.
We're trying to raise our goats to be 100% on pasture the entire year.
Even when there's snow.
So cold hardy, diet hardy, I guess.
Just badass bulletproof goats.
Hardy to parasites.
And that's the thing. That's the trick. Is, I think, more than any other species of farm animal, it's the goats that have been neglected the most. And there's a lot of reasons for that. People don't like goats, like spiritually, biblically, people don't like goats, for one. Mm-hmm. Americans don't eat goats, so there's not a lot of incentive to like raise really good goat, you know, and have really strong genetics that way. The only people who like goats are people who do like show goats or pet goats, fainters, cute, whatever.
Yeah, miniatures.
Yeah, and you know, there's a pretty okay dairy goat industry now that's sort of been up and coming for a while now, but the bottom line is that, to my mind, broad strokes, for the past 100 to 150 to 200 years, if a person had a goat, they were penned in a goat bunker that they like could not escape from.
Yeah, just kept in tight confinement.
Yep, which leads to worminess and other, you know, diseases and problems, and then they become utterly dependent on wormers and medicines and human intervention and babying, basically. So it's a lot, even though people expect goats to be indestructible and they're out there standing on top of your car eating a tin can kind of thing. They're
quite fragile, actually.
Well, maybe not fragile, but when something goes wrong, they need us, you know, whereas if something,
they're just not hardy.
They're not hardy. We're looking for the hardiest stock that we can find. We're talking to people who don't worm on a schedule, and when they do encounter problems like that, they deal with it holistically first. Mm-hmm. And if we get more seriously into goats, it's gonna be pretty hardcore for a while, at least for the first few years.
Yeah, so part of the process of establishing a very hardy herd when the genetics aren't widely available is basically having to establish the good genetics on your own, which involves heavy culling
or selling. Mm-hmm. You know, like you said before, like we probably wouldn't worm again. And the caveat to that is, like, if I ever worm a goat again to save its life,
you're not going to breed it.
I'm not going to breed it, and I'm either going to castrate it and eat it, or I'm going to sell it.
Yeah.
There's a really cool YouTube channel out there that deserves way more attention. They're called Integrity Ranch. He's got a mean line of goats going right now. I'd like to reach out to him and talk to him soon.
And he swears up and down that there's no one else breeding goats as hardy as his.
Right.
Which is frustrating because that means we basically have to establish those genetics on our own.
Or, you know, we might go down there and buy some goats from him, like something. If we decide we really want to get into it, because again, we're very much in the planning stages.
And we're traumatized.
Yeah. We just don't have the time or the emotional capacity or the financial resources to be babying these goats.
Yeah, and it's also
or any of the animals. If we get sheep or pigs or
our philosophy
cattle.
is the same with our chickens and our rabbits. Like, and our plants and our garden and our trees, like everything. It has to be able to survive on its own, and if it can't, then it doesn't get to be part of the farm.
Thrive on neglect. Take care of itself, earn a living. And none of that is really a philosophy that like we've created ourselves independently, but it's something that we've gotten from people that we've been looking up to and following. So what would you do differently
with something like Billy?
Yeah.
Well, I first of all would like to learn about a little bit more about the culling process, because it's one thing to cull an adolescent or adult animal, but it's another thing to have to cull an infant. So I would like to learn what that process looks like if it's the same. I mean, it's not the same obviously in the sense that we wouldn't butcher it, but because it's a sick baby, it has barely any meat on it, and the meat it does have on it, I don't want to eat
because it's sick.
Yeah, and it's also just so heartbreaking to have to put down a baby that I would probably prefer to put it to rest as opposed to without eating it. If that makes sense.
I'm not sure I agree.
I mean, I'm not opposed to eating a baby goat.
As long as it's not tainted.
But I wouldn't. Make some cabrito. We're talking about Billy, and I wouldn't eat Billy, not just because of how I felt about him, but because of the condition he was in.
Well, we couldn't have anyway because he got wormed.
Right.
Not wormed. Well, yeah, because he got wormed and also.
And the antibiotics.
Yeah, there's a 60-day.
But in the future, we wouldn't have intervened with antibiotics and chemical dewormers. So from that perspective, the meat would be fine.
Yeah.
So basically, I do want to say that I did know in my gut the whole time that he was sick that he wasn't going to make it. And that was just a hard reality for us to accept again because he was our first goat. But in the future, I wouldn't have a hard time accepting it, and I would be confident in my gut instinct that he would be better off just being cold. So
there was that video we watched. The guy was talking about every single animal he's ever taken to the vet has died anyway.
Right. So
he doesn't do that anymore.
Vets are off the table for us.
The thing that I would do different is I would have waited. I wouldn't have bought these boys in the first place.
Right.
So these winter babies just aren't going to play for our system. And I don't know. I got too excited. We've also had such a warm spring that I think that I got ahead of myself, thinking that it would be safe and okay for them out here.
I mean, it has been. Rufus is fine.
Right. That's something that we're getting away with right now. Like if the temperature dropped to like negative whatever, which it could here for this part of the world that we're in, even though it's March, it could still snow, it could still get crazy. He wouldn't. I don't know if he can make it out here with his little baby summer coat on. I'm not sure that he could.
That's true.
So yeah, no more of these winter babies. Also, again, let's buy a doe, because let's get a mom out here to take care of these little babies so that we don't have to. But yeah, that's the big one for me, is just should have waited.
Right. The other thing is, if I knew that we had a small goat like Billy who was experiencing some health issues, and I didn't necessarily know in my gut that he was definitely going to die, but he was sick, I'm only going to be using holistic herbal remedies, exclusively
to try and save them. But even if you save them,
and honestly, I wanted to use herbal remedies in place of some of the more conventional remedies that we did use on Billy. I just didn't have the supplies on hand.
Right. Yeah, you're still building your kit.
Yeah.
But again, and we were talking about it even with him, it's like, man, even if he pulls through, we can't keep him, we can't breed him, The best he would have gotten was he would have been castrated
and kept as
and he would have been kept here as a pet. That's not going to fly when we have a flock of, I don't know,
however many,
10 or 15 or 20 goats out here. We can't keep them all just because they're cute, If an animal's not performing, and come back and see what happens the next time we have a sick animal. See if we can actually stay true.
Put our money where our mouth
is. Yeah, man, because it's not easy. But these animals, if they're having a hard time out here, then they need to be moved on one way or another, because it's not fair to them to be made to live out here,
and
it's not fair on us to be.
Yeah, from a wider lens too, like the genetics of the livestock in the area and in the country needs to be hardened.
Yep. And I would love to add to that.
Like, we gotta stop babying and
these goats,
doing everything in our power to save the lives, like freaking blood transfusions for goats and shit. Like, we don't need to be doing that. That's not gonna create resiliency for the animals or humanity.
Yeah.
So
I agree. And I'd really like to add to that. Like I said before, we got brush that we want to clear. So I thought, well, hell, let's try some goats. But yeah, now I'm feeling like really inspired, more inspired to get into goats, because they deserve it, as a species. They deserve to be bred better, to have a better chance. Like, if all the humans disappeared today, all these freaking goats, they'd be gone, man. Except, evolution would take hold and whatever, but it's just,
we can do our part as, what do you call someone that has animals?
animal husbandmen.
As farmers, I guess, even though we don't call ourselves farmers, but
I don't know. Like, we're part of nature too. And
as stewards,
we're not helping nature. We're just hot wiring her right now, and I don't want to add to that.
That's a good way of putting it. Well, I think that's a good note to end on. That pretty much sums up our experience with owning goats so far for less than 3 weeks. But obviously we have a lot of thoughts, and we just wanted to share them as part of our learning how to homestead and become self-sufficient journey.
Word.
Thanks. Oh, he's pooping. Hold on. Oh my gosh. I can't handle it. He's like, all right, I found the grass. I'm not going any further.
Come on, Billy. Come on, Billy. You didn't believe me when I told you, did you?
I believed you. I just didn't imagine how freaking cute it was.